I remember landing, and it was hotter than the hinges of hell. You got off the plane, somebody handed you a water bottle, and that was down your throat right away. Our assistant division commander at the time, Hugh Shelton, Brigadier Shelton, had gotten there early, called back and said, if you want to know what it's like, turn on your oven, stick your head in there, then turn on a hairdryer and blow that in your ear. And so I remember my wife and I seated at home in early August of 1990, and both of us were company commanders. And we watched CNN, which was still that fledgling news network. Yeah. That the Iraqi army had invaded Kuwait, and not long after that, CJ, my wife, CJ's we didn't have cell phones. The phone rang. It was CJ's unit, and they had been alerted. So we quickly scrawled out this code. Green means the division's is at X hour. Blue means the division's at H hour. Pumpkin means this. And she went into work, and an hour and a half later called me with, blue pumpkin chimpanzee or whatever. Right. And so very rapidly, not just our units in the 101st Airborne Division, but I think the whole Army had to relearn how to deploy a large formation. And CJ got there before I did. She was, I think, about a week before I did, she left. My sister came and stayed with our house and our two dogs, but just something as simple as that of how soldiers ready their homes to deploy is something we all had to learn. And something that, I think shows that the Army didn't really know how to deploy a large force is we got there and we were unprepared as an enterprise to spend months in the desert. Not long after we got there, we tried to acclimate in terms of just the physical environment, and then we were focused on training. Well, we're an infantry unit, let's go shoot, let's do some marksmanship. Well, there's not that much ammunition in theater. And then, okay, we've got the ammunition, let's go fire. Well, we don't have any targets. Well, okay, go get some copier paper. We got copier paper. Yeah. We don't have, we're going to have to scroll on them with magic markers. Right. And then we don't have any sticks to put them in the ground with. And then we don't have any staples. I mean, the really basic things. As an Army, I think we learned a lot in that deployment going over there and making sure we were ready to fight when we had to. The plan was that once the air war started, it would fix the Iraqi Army, and that's when 18th Airborne Corps and the 101st Airborne Division would move west. So we prepared to fly out there, and C-130s land at a airfield called Rafah, Saudi Arabia. And I remember getting on a plane, getting everything working out. I was one of the lead members of the battalion going up there, so I could go meet our quartering party in the assembly area we were going to occupy. The plane took off, went up there, went around some, and came back. Apparently the weather wasn't going to work well. We didn't want to, as I understand it, we didn't want to use radar at that airfield to telegraph that a large force was landing there. So now I come back and I get queued for the next flight to go up there. And I got into one of the trucks. It was going to be on the flight, so nobody's going to leave me. But I was dog tired, and so I went to sleep. I went to sleep with Tim Fay in the vehicle too. And we both promised each other we'd wake each other up. Yeah. Well, I woke up and Tim Fay wasn't there. He'd hopped on an earlier flight and had taken off. So I ended up as the last flight out of King Fahd Airport. I landed at Rafah, and I went up to my boss and said, "Sir, I apologize. I know I was supposed to be one of the first guys here. I'm sorry I'm the last." He says, "No, this is the second flight that's landed. We're having all kinds of trouble getting aircraft to land." Hopped in a vehicle, took as much of the company who was there, met the great Sergeant Chris Gambots, who had been on emergency leave and shows up at Rafah, Saudi Arabia. "Sergeant Gambots, good to see you. Grab your crap." And we drove out into the desert. It was one of these where you drove to a spot on Tapline Road, about the only paved road in the area, turned left, and went into the desert, hoping that you're on the right azimuth, trying to look at the slugger anytime you can. And we got there, our quartering party was there, having generally identified an assembly area. As the rest of the company showed up, we started preparing a defensive position. we noted, much to our dismay, that in this particular area, you dug down 6 or 8 inches and you hit bedrock. So 6 or 8 inches isn't deep enough for a fighting position. So we dig down to the bedrock and then build up with sandbags, which was, no pleasant accomplishment. But we ended up establishing a defensive position, in coordination with the rest of the battalion, and then periodically would see the aircraft flying north or coming back south. So I saw an Iraqi position 15 meters in front of me, and I thought, I'm going to go look at it. I want a first-hand account. And the position was facing away. So I walked up to the entrance at the back, and they had put some sandbags down, empty sandbags, I think as shade from the sun. Yeah. So I flipped up the sandbags and took one step down to the first step into it. And fortunately for me, Staff Sergeant Jimmy Dean Roden had moved off to the right side and taken up a prone position, because as soon as I did that, I heard the distinct noise of his selector leveler going from safe to semi. And I remember him saying, Jesus Christ, there's somebody in there. So I leapt back. We had just gotten a new holster that it was Cordura, so you actually had to put your thumb in it, push down, and then lift the flap up from the leather holsters. Right. And so I leapt back, trying to jerk my .45 out of the holster, just having no luck. And 3 Iraqis emerged from this position. And if you think about it from their perspective, yesterday, hell came to breakfast. The whole place, there's explosions, there's automatic weapons fire, they can see people being carried away. I don't know if they were in that position, got overlooked, or they gathered overnight. And now, the next morning, people came back. All night there was activity overhead. Right. And what have they heard? Explosions and rifle fire. So I'm pretty sure they thought it was the end of days. But Sergeant Roden got them all prone, searched them all, and then he had been the guy from the company that had flown to Saudi Arabia about a week before to go buy goodies. He had come back with these chocolate bars that just tasted terrible. So we told Sergeant Roden, you're stuck with those, brother. He gave him this bad-tasting candy bar. And so you saw the first guy get searched, and then somebody puts a candy bar in front of him, and he's like, I don't know if I want to be. So the interpreter says, no, you can eat that. So he's thinking, okay. This is about the time where the second guy happens. He gives him the candy bar. These 2 guys are now telling us everything. Hey, that's where my company commander's position is. There's an officer position over here. You got to make sure you get him. They just started talking about everything. And so that my accidentally capturing 3 Iraqi POWs, I got our company's booby prize for the war. Right. The stupidest thing that anybody did was my award.
What's it like? So you may not even have thought about this at the time. You're now in combat where you're facing an enemy that wants to kill you. All the training that you've gone through, all the books that you've read and courses you've taken, and now you're in it. Is there any sense of, are you aware of all this, or is it just I'm doing a job and I'll think about it later?
So I don't, this comes across with a sense of bravado that's unintended and unmerited. But early on, I decided, if you're deploying to a theater of war, prepare yourself before you go so that you're not coming back. Both CJ and I wrote out a letter to our next of kin or to each other that was really sort of administrative. Hey, here's the kind of funeral I'd like. Here's where I'd like to be buried. Like I say, almost administrative. And we had made sure that financially we had, taken care of either of each other or whoever's left for the house and the dogs. And then that mindset carried on, at least for me, while I was there. There were 2 things I think that does for you. And number one, if you really have that mindset, it helps you prevent avoiding dangerous things. Because you've already told yourself, you're prepared not to come back. So, hey, if you do get to come back, what a great deal. The other thing is, when you do come back, it's even sweeter. So at least for me personally, I certainly tried not to think about mortality. But it did, and other folks in the company told me this, that it's amazing, your first time you deploy to a theater of war, you think that everything's going to change, that people are going to behave differently, and most of us don't. If somebody is skating, in peacetime, they'll probably behave about the same way as they are. People in our company, we had one guy fall asleep when he was in an observation post out in front of a defensive position. There was another young man who decided his anti-tank weapon was too heavy and left it behind. And he received some personal supervision from Sergeant First Class Ricky Wilder after that occurred. That was certainly an important lesson, but I didn't notice anybody, certainly after we'd been there a while, I found everybody behaved about the way they had before. I thought the vast majority of the American soldiers I came in touch with were entirely professional, focused on a mission and each other. That's not to say that there weren't some surprises. In our mortar section, Corporal McClellan, a very quiet man, competent, rarely spoke. He got a Valorous Award. We made contact when the war began for real, and we were moving around this huge pump station. And he was the assistant gunner. Well, one of the responsibilities for that is putting up aiming stakes. So while the rest of us, after we made contact, had sought cover, not him, he walked out toward the fire, put his back to the people firing, put the aiming stake in, and waited for direction from his squad leader about whether he needed to move left or right. And so it's not that I wouldn't have expected that from him, but here was a guy who didn't make a lot of noise, wasn't one of the guys out front yelling all the time. Yeah. And when stuff sort of figuratively hit the fan, he was unfazed. He did his job and didn't really care that people were shooting at him from the back.
You surprised at how quickly the ground war progressed and then ended? I won't say it was simple. People lost their lives, but it was relatively quick.
I think we had made the enemy more competent than they were. I don't think we knew how good we were as an enterprise. You've heard me here. There's this inter-service rivalry that goes on. I harass pilots all the time, but nobody is happier to be teamed up with the world's greatest Air Force than an infantryman in the same nation. And the Air Force performance was magnificent, and so we should have had an inkling that it was going to be easier. I know at the higher levels we retimed the two attacks because there was a perception that the first attack into into Kuwait itself was going more quickly than had been thought. So in fact, our brigade had been scheduled not to leave until the sun had gone down. We ended up moving it forward several hours and landing right as the sun was going down. I think, at least from my perspective, we were burdened by, here's our perspective, here's what we see, here's what we know. The first night when 3rd Brigade had gone in, our artillery and our anti-tank weapons, just based on the capabilities of the helicopters, couldn't get all the way up to where the dismounted infantry was going. So they landed about 40 miles south. And then they were going to drive, ideally they were going to drive and link up with us right when the dismounted infantry had landed. Well, it turned out they got stuck in the mud. We landed in a little bit of rain. Tim Fay's company was the lead company, Charlie Company. They cleared this pump station. And don't think about a gas station, think about 4 to 8 city blocks of pump station. Our company went around the edge. We had that contact that I talked to you about, and then we went and seized a small airstrip that we thought might have some Iraqi helicopters on it. And we were supposed to then move about 3 more kilometers out to a battle position, but we got directed not to go. I didn't know it at the time, but 2 things had happened. One is our artillery and our anti-tank weapons, weren't going to arrive that night. And 2, apparently General Shelton had called our brigade commander, Colonel Bobby Clark, and said, moving target indicators, it seems that there is a heavy Iraqi division headed up Highway 8 towards your brigade. Weather's pretty bad. I don't think you're going to get much air support. Good luck. And so one of the reasons I think we were stopped there just after the airfield and told to set up a defensive position was a concern that we wanted to stay fairly consolidated if we didn't have artillery and heavy anti-tank weapons. Then, the next day, 3rd Platoon cleared one of the few paved routes to 2nd Battalion. And everybody had about an hour's worth of sleep. They go on this 12-kilometer move. Second platoon and our reserve platoon, the mortar section, move out to the battle position, start to prepare it. Our tow platoon, the heavy anti-tank weapons, they were man-packing, carrying 2 systems almost 4 kilometers out to the position with ammunition, which is a Herculean task. We probably should have got them evaluated for mental unfitness just because they were doing it, but incredibly tough behavior. We finally got the company consolidated that evening, got the position prepared, and candidly, I can't remember if it was the next morning or not, but then this monsoon hit us. Soldiers' fighting positions filled with water and didn't drain. And so these troopers in this monsoon, hey, get up, move about a meter, redig the fighting position. So I know that's not precisely responsive to your question, but to me I was really impressed with how these universally young men responded to hardship, and were, like I said, they were low on Maslow's hierarchy,
right.
But man, were they tough.
At some point, you find yourself back in Iraqi freedom.
Yeah.
When was that?
So I told you I'd come to D.C. out of Hawaii, and everybody in the Army typically needs to do some time at the corporate headquarters, and so I was assigned in the Pentagon in the Army G8. So I was lucky enough to be branch chief, and fortunately the other people in the branch knew what we were doing because I didn't really. But we were responsible collectively, essentially, for the Army's checkbook for equipment in the future years. And so we were having to play with, when do you need that money this year? Because we're clearly deploying forces to Iraq. We're going to use that money that may have been templated for this quarter to do that. We'll get you that money for this future equipment later on in the year. And I remember, I'd been selected for battalion command. I got the call that I had got my first choice, 3rd Battalion of the 187th Infantry. I would get to go back to my regiment. You see right here the unit insignia of the 187th. So my boss didn't get any meaningful work out of me for a week after I heard that. But I was at a computer one day with a colleague, and we were trying to figure out how to fund tank engine repair throughout the Army for the next 15 years. And somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, somebody here needs to talk to you. I said, look, I don't have time. We got to get this done and over to the right folks and the rest of the staff.
Right.
And I got another tab and said, you really need to talk to this guy. And I turned around, and it was Major General Dave Petraeus, who was going to take command of the 101st and had commanded the battalion that I was going to go command previously. So I turned around and said, hey, sir, didn't expect to see you here today. And he kind of looked me up and down and thought, But, we talked for a bit, and we both knew that the Army was headed to Kuwait, and that absent something significant changing, there was probably going to be a war. Not long after that, I got a phone call saying General Petraeus was asking the Army to send some of the lieutenant colonels who were going to command battalions later on to deploy them early with the division. And so I was fortunate that I was one of 5 that got to go do that. I knew the G3, the ops officer, Colonel Ricky Gibbs at the time, retired brigadier general, and Ricky assigned me in the rear command post, the sustainment command post, once I got over there.
How had things changed from your first time in Iraq to now, this time? Obviously, your responsibilities and duties had changed, but overall.
Well, and we were much farther into the country. It was a different fight. I remember when we kicked off the war, instead of, as we'd done before, this huge leap by brigade into successive positions, now we were moving as part of a corps, slowly moving forward. And the division in particular was utilized to clear towns that 3rd Infantry Division, a mechanized division, had very soundly tactically bypassed. So that was a different fight. It was a series of fights, essentially by brigade as the division went forward. And once I took command, the division was all the way up north. Our battalion in particular was right along the Syrian border, People have sometimes heard of Tal Afar, Iraq. You go to Mosul, you head out west. Tal Afar is a huge airfield. You go further west, there's a 1 mile high mountain, Sinjar Mountain, that pops up out of nowhere. We were essentially west of that, and our battalion was responsible all the way up into Turkey, a gate between Iraq and Turkey. So it was a huge expanse. And so the dispersion was significantly different. We ended up with platoons in various posts around the area of operation. While Colonel Fetterman, Lee Fetterman, the guy I had followed, had been focused on fighting the ground war. And this battalion had been attached to 3rd Infantry Division. This battalion had helped secure the Baghdad International Airport. It was a well-trained, capable, it had proven itself, and was awarded, I think, its 6th Presidential Unit Citation as part of 3rd Infantry Division for that. But how dispersed we are was a big change. The mission we had, which we interpreted here, a fairly stable area, is what we wanted to do is turn this into a free market and a democracy. So we weren't there to subjugate anybody, we were there to enable people.
Was there any thought personally that when you're there in Iraq for the second time that maybe we'd have done it the first time, we wouldn't still be here?
So there weren't many. I think I was the only Desert Storm veteran in the battalion. I think there were a couple others in the brigade. Sergeant Major Hardy had he had earned a CIB in Somalia, a Combat Infantryman's Badge. I believe he and I were the only ones who ended up earning a star on our CIBs in the battalion. So there weren't a lot of people with Desert Storm experience, and so maybe that perspective. I do remember writing home to the families one time and saying, listen, I know you would like your soldiers home. We would love to be home. However, I was here a decade ago. I'm here now. I don't want our kids to have to come another decade from now and have to do something. Now that leads back to your question earlier. Did I think we're going to be there 2 decades? Yeah. Or at least in the Middle East? No. I was arguing that let's invest the time now, and then we won't have to come back in a decade. Well, we were still deployed a decade later.
When you take a look back on your career, especially your time in combat, how do you think that's affected or changed your life, changed your perspective?
Yeah. Well, I was fortunate enough to spend 30 years as an infantryman, and I don't know that anybody comes through that sort of in one piece. I've got the ankles and the knees, and to a certain extent the shoulders to prove the wear and tear. I think, like all of us, I don't know if it's PTSD or just how seeing your friends maimed or killed. It's clearly got an effect on everybody. Yeah. I think there's at least for me, there's kind of a stoicism and maybe a calm. It's interesting. A good friend of mine, Tim Fay, the Charlie Company commander in Desert Storm, left the Army and went into what I would characterize as the officer candidate school for United Airlines. And one of the things he had to do was be a customer service rep at an airport. And he told me he was at O'Hare Airport in the middle of the night, and whoever he was with said, "This is as boring as it gets." And he said, "Oh no, this is not as boring as it gets." And so I think those kinds of experiences, both when things are going awry, when there's significant danger or just a great deal of complexity, helps you put things in context. Yeah. I think, like a lot of people in the Army, I worry about the readiness of our military. We traditionally enter wars unprepared and ill-equipped, and the people that pay the price are generally the 18 to 25-year-olds who are, and the junior NCOs, officers, and soldiers who we commit. It's not that they're bad people or they're not disciplined, but we just haven't invested enough. My undergraduate degree's in economics. I don't know if we can afford to keep that kind of military in place all the time. So that, that kind of wears on you too.
Yeah.
But I tell people I was blessed to get to do it, and I really feel that way. I waited to retire. I mean, till the last day I could, without actually losing the leave I had accrued to leave the Army, because I really enjoyed it, and I still in my in the present role I love being in contact with soldiers, trying to stay in touch with them. The previous job I had after I retired fortunately allowed me to still stay in touch. I'm remarkably impressed with the technological innovation surrounding gloves and boots. I started off in the Army with, a wool liner and a leather glove, and probably have some of the numbness to prove it. The boots that I was wearing when I got frostbite in Ranger School were not of any assistance. And, for dismounted infantrymen or infantry persons now, we have sleeping bags and Gore-Tex, and I'm envious of people that get to be equipped that well. Somebody asked me, what's the biggest technological innovation you've seen? I said, well, I don't know about that. I'll tell you the one I appreciate the most: gloves and boots. So I don't know. The last thing I'll say about this is I am concerned when people who have only a distant attachment to service are making decisions about when to commit people to fight, and making decisions about whether the actions they took were prudent. I am absolutely a believer in civilian control of the military. I had an oath to the Constitution. This is a democratic republic. Sometimes those of us who either are in uniform or were in uniform, we're just insufficiently persuasive or explanatory. Right. But there were times in my career where someone from afar had adjudged either my actions or one of my subordinates' actions as ill-conceived. And my response was, well, I can appreciate that from where you are right now and from the perspective you have, you find them ill-conceived. I have, to the best of my ability, really thought through this, and I don't think they were. Given the circumstances, given the requirements, no, I don't think they were. If you don't mind, I'll tell you a story about another great guy I worked for and how this played out. He retired as a 2-star general, Jeff Schlosser. He's an aviator, and of course, there's, the infantrymen and aviators. It's one of these, aviator. I was lucky enough, he was one of the assistant commanders when I was battalion commander, and then I got to work directly for him at the National Counterterrorism Center. Excuse me. And in that job, he never said it, but one of the things I learned from his comportment and his behavior was he held his superiors to a higher standard than he did his subordinates. And that meant he held them accountable as a subordinate. He expected great things, sophisticated things from his bosses, and when they let him down, he informed them that they had let him down. And I thought that was a tremendous example to set. Later on in his career, he was the division commander of the 101st Airborne Division. There was an unfortunate circumstance that took place. He investigated it. He took the action he deemed appropriate. And so, in legalese, he disposed of the report of misconduct. Later on, he had been nominated to be a 3-star general. He was informed that the Army was relooking the circumstances. Mm-hmm. And while I'm paraphrasing here, my understanding is he told his superiors, no, I've already done that. You can charge me, or you can do nothing. And I think he was told essentially, Jeff, you don't understand. And he said, you're right, I don't. You'll have my retirement paperwork. There was a Marine aviator I was with in the Command and Staff College, and at one point in time, he said to the, mostly soldiers in the class, you guys are something, you'll sacrifice your lives for a cause. You just won't sacrifice your careers. And my take is that battlefield courage is not in short supply. Conference room courage is, unfortunately. And there have been several times I have not been conference room courageous. But here's Jeff Slosser, who was.
It's interesting.